Good evening, friends. Tonight, we are going to turn back the dial of the machine of practice and return into that medieval world of horse-drawn carts, castles, and deeply questionable sanitation to attend a wedding. A small spoiler: the evening's entertainment may include watching a nightly tournament rather than watching the bride and groom awkwardly cut an ear cake. Now dim the lights, and with the sound of bells, let us step together into tonight's story. You wake up not because an alarm clock has disturbed you, but because a chill has stirred you awake. You can feel cold air slipping in through some cracks. You pull the rough wool blanket higher over yourself, covering your nose and mouth, and leaving only your eyes exposed. The air is filled with a complicated smell, the lingering smoky scent of burnt wood, the freshness of licorice, and a very human blend of sweat and the body odor of people who have not bathed. You slowly open your eyes, adjusting to the dimness of the room. The light is coming through a tiny window. There is no glass in it. Instead, it is covered with a layer of oil-soaked linen, barely letting in a little milky daylight. You blink and finally make out your surroundings. You are not sleeping alone. In fact, this enormous bed, which takes up nearly a quarter of the room, has several people sprawled across it. On your left is your cousin, sleeping soundly and giving off a faint snore. At the other end of the bed, your two little nieces are curled up together like kittens. This is everyday life for a prosperous medieval household. Even at a time when guests are being entertained for an important wedding, private space is still a luxury. Most people, rich or poor alike, went to sleep and woke up in communal spaces like this. Privacy, as a concept, might as well not yet have been invented. You move with great care, trying not to disturb anyone, and climb down from the bed. The moment your feet touch the icy stone floor, you cannot help but shiver. All right, time to get dressed. Your clothes are draped over a wooden chest at the foot of the bed. A linen undergarment, and over that, a woolen gown. You pull on the shirt quickly. The linen feels somewhat stiff against your skin, but it is still far more comfortable than wearing wool. Direct. Then comes the gown, thick, warm, but also a little scratchy. As you clumsily straighten the collar and cuffs, you listen to the sounds filling the house. From downstairs come the cries of livestock in the shed, along with the muffled noises of servants starting a fire and moving things around. The whole world is waking up slowly. Once dressed, you walk to a basin in the corner. The water was drawn by a servant last night, and by now it is bitterly cold. You splash your face haphazardly, and the shock clears your mind at once. As for your teeth, you pick up a small clean piece of coarse linen, dab it with a little salt and some crushed dried herbs, and begin rubbing your teeth back and forth. This is your toothbrush and toothpaste, a completely natural method of oral care with a faint salty, herbal freshness. It sounds a little crude, but it genuinely does have some cleaning effect and helps freshen the breath. It is, in its own way, a fairly common piece of obscure practical wisdom. You rinse your mouth and walk to the small window, wanting to see what the sky looks like outside. You notice that one corner of the window contains a tiny piece of real glass, only about the size of a palm. Its shape is irregular, and its surface is rippled and distorted. At the time, this is a rarity, a sign of the family's wealth and status. It is still early, the sky is gray, but on the far horizon there is already a faint line of light. Today will be a long and important day. Once you are ready, you eat a simple breakfast of bread and ale with your family. Then join the group heading to the wedding venue, the bride's family Manor. Do not imagine this journey as riding in a comfortable carriage over a smooth paved road. It is nothing of the sort. You have been given a relatively docile horse, which already counts as rather good treatment. Many of your more distant relatives and lower status guests are crammed into an ox cart with no spring suspension at all, bouncing along the rutted road like a sack of potatoes rolling around in a sieve. You sit astride your horse, gripping the reins tightly. your body swaying with its gait. What passes for a road here is really just a dirt track compacted by countless wheels and hooves. It seems there was a light rain last night, and now the way is full of mud pits and ankle-deep ruts. With every step your horse takes, its hoof sinks deep into the mud, and then pulls free again with a wet sucking sound, splashing mud up the legs of your clothes. The air is full of the smell of damp earth, horse sweat, and the odor of manure drifting from distant villages. This blend of pastoral air and household waste is the everyday perfume of the Middle Ages. You guide your horse carefully, trying to avoid the patches of mud that look the most dangerous. The procession moves very slowly. A distance that would take us 10 minutes by car might well take over an hour here. This is the normal reality of medieval travel. Terrible road conditions drastically limited the speed and range of people's movement. Those magnificent stone roads built by the Roman Empire had long since fallen into disrepair. Most stretches had been covered over by dirt and vegetation. What remained, for the most part, were primitive earthen roads like this one. That also helps explain why communities at the time were relatively closed. A wedding that required crossing several villages was already a major undertaking that demanded careful planning. You take a small metal ball out of your leather pouch at your waist. It is called a pomander, a hollow sphere filled with expensive aromatics, such as ambergris, cloves, musk, and dried flower petals. Whenever you pass somewhere especially foul-smelling, say, the shack of a tanner working leather by the roadside, you raise it to your nose and inhale. Its rich, warm fragrance temporarily masks the surrounding stench and gives you a moment's comfort. This little object is not only a practical tool for dealing with a harsh environment, it is also a subtle marker of your status. After all, being able to carry such costly spices on your person is itself a display of wealth. Gradually, the party climbs a slope, and your view opens up. You can see rolling fields stretching into the distance, most of them without fences, forming an open landscape. Far off, you spot a few solitary travelers on the road. At that moment, one of your uncles beside you instinctively tightens his hand around the sword at his waist. He senses danger. Popular novels and films always depict the Middle Ages as a world crawling with bandits and danger, as though every woodland hides robbers ready to pounce. But that danger may be exaggerated for a large group like yours. Clearly on its way to a wedding, the chances of being attacked are actually rather low. The fear in people's minds, the feeling of risk may be far greater than the statistical likelihood of real danger. You watch those figures in the distance disappear. They show no sign of ill intent. Perhaps they too are simply traveling down the road of their own life, just as you are. The muddy road still stretches on beneath you, but you know the destination cannot be far now. When the bride's family manor finally comes into view, you almost let out a sigh of relief. At the entrance to the manor, there is already a scene of great bustle, a kind of organized chaos. Servants hurry to take horses from arriving guests and lead them to temporary stables. Guests gather in little groups, calling greetings loudly and embracing one another. The air is full of anticipation and festive joy. You slide awkwardly down from your horse, and when your feet touch solid ground, it feels as if the whole world has finally stopped swaying. You quickly smooth your wind-blown hair and brush at your robe, which is spattered with mud, trying to make yourself look more presentable. Because you know that the moment you step into this space, a silent social competition has already begun. Every movement you make here, every word you say, even every glance, is being observed and assessed by those around you. The first thing you must do is greet the hosts. You follow your family to the bride's father, a country gentleman of imposing bearing. You imitate your father and bow respectfully, while he responds with a proper nod. Then your gaze begins to search through the crowd like a human radar. You swiftly scan everyone present, mentally sorting them into categories according to what they are wearing. This is a crucial social skill in the medieval world without business cards or social media. Clothing is the clearest statement of who a person is. Look over there, that gentleman in the dark red velvet robe. That brilliant color was dyed with an expensive pigment made from cochineal. He is undoubtedly one of the most exalted guests present today. And that lady, there her skirt is as deep blue as the night sky. That color comes from lapis pigment brought from distant Afghanistan, worth almost as much as gold. By contrast, the brown wool gown you are wearing, though respectable, is somewhat muted in color. It clearly marks you as belonging to a family that is comfortably off, but not among the highest great houses. By observing such details, you can roughly grasp the structure of power in the room, whom you ought to show greater deference to, and from whom you should keep your distance. When you spot a close great uncle, you go over to him. You exchange greetings and then perform a gesture very common at the time, the kiss of peace. You kiss one another on the cheek. It is a non-romantic gesture expressing intimacy, trust, and alliance. His freshly shaved beard stubble prickles your cheek, and you struggle not to scratch at it, keeping a polite smile on your face. This sort of physical contact was very common in social settings then. More than a simple handshake, it created a sense of closeness between people. Your eyes happen to fall on the interaction between the bride's family and the noble Lord Redveld. The bride's father is almost abjectly deferential before him. We usually imagine feudalism as a neatly ordered pyramid, with the king at the top, then great lords, then lesser nobles and knights. But the reality was far messier and more complex than that model suggests. It was more like a vast web woven out of countless personal loyalties, private grudges, family alliances, and mutual obligation. What you are seeing in front of you is a living node in that web. The bride's family is showing fealty to this lord, perhaps to seek protection, perhaps to secure some commercial privilege. Such complicated networks of relationship were extremely common in the Middle Ages. You draw your gaze back, take a deep breath, and prepare to play your own part in this web, according to your station. A peal of bells rings out, announcing that the wedding ceremony is about to begin officially, and the crowd begins moving toward the parish church beside the manor. Curiously, though, no one goes straight inside. Instead, everyone stops before the church doors and gathers in a semicircle on the open ground by the churchyard. The bride and groom, surrounded by their kin, step onto the church porch before a priest in vestment. This is where the legal core of the wedding takes place, at the church door. At tea. At the time, this was standard procedure. Marriage was first and foremost a public social contract with a legal force, and so it had to be concluded in the sight of everyone. The church porch, this space between the secular world outside, the village, and the sacred world. Inside the church was the perfect site for the ceremony. It symbolized that the marriage was both blessed by God and recognized by the community. The priest clears his throat. He does not use the Latin that most people would not understand. Instead, he speaks in the local vernacular, that is, in the medieval form of English, spoken there, and calls out loudly to the assembled people, "Is there any among you who knows of any impediment to the union of these two?" He pauses and looks around. The crowd is silent, except for the rustling of leaves in the wind. This is the last chance for anyone with relevant knowledge to object, for example, if the bride or groom is already betrothed to someone else, or if they are related by blood. No objection is raised. The ceremony moves into the next crucial stage, the declaration of property. The bride's father publicly announces the dowry his daughter brings into the marriage, usually money, land, or valuable goods. Immediately afterward, the groom publicly declares the dower he promises to the bride. That is, if he dies before his wife, she will be entitled to inherit part of his property, so as to secure her future. Both are stated plainly and explicitly. Watching them, you feel that this looks less like a romantic ceremony than like the signing of a commercial contract. full of practicality and calculation. Then the most sacred moment arrives. Under the priest's guidance, the bride and groom begin to exchange vows. Their voices tremble somewhat, but they are clear enough for all those nearby to hear. Then the groom produces a ring, a simple plain gold band. He does not immediately place it on the bride's finger. Instead, he performs a gesture filled with religious symbolism. Holding the ring, he touches it in turn to the bride's thumb, index finger, and middle finger, while murmuring, "In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." And only then does he slide it firmly onto the ring finger of her left. This Trinitarian gesture gives sacred weight to that small circle of metal. You look at the bride's face. Her expression is calm and solemn, revealing little emotion. According to canon law, marriage must rest on the free consent of both parties. But in a world shaped by family arrangement, immense social and economic pressure, and extremely limited personal choice, how free was that consent in reality? For the bride especially, did she truly have the right to say no? Or was her consent merely a public statement made when there was no other option? You look at the couple, surrounded by the gaze of the whole community. Their union is the affair not only of two individuals, but of two families. At this moment, personal feeling seems almost submerged beneath a larger collective contract. But when the legal ritual at the church door is complete, the heavy wooden doors are slowly pushed open, and a cool, shadowed breath of air washes over you. The newly married couple enters first, and the guests file after them to attend the nuptial mass. Stepping from the brightness outside into the dim church interior, you instantly feel the change in atmosphere. The scene shifts from the public, slightly noisy legal setting to a solemn, inward sacred space. The church is very, very tall. Stone vaults meet high above your head, and sounds take on a strange echo here. The air carries a distinctive scent: old stone, burning beeswax, candles, and the faint trace of incense. It smells both solemn and mysterious. As your eyes adjust, you begin to make out the space around you. Sunlight pours through the stained glass windows high above, casting patches of red, blue, and gold across the stone floor, like a moving abstract paint. The windows depict figures and scenes from biblical stories. For the illiterate common people, this is the Bible they can understand, the church's important tool for visual teaching. You find a place to stand, and the Mass begins. The priest stands before the distant altar and starts chanting in Latin. This is a language you do not understand at all, and for the overwhelming majority of ordinary people at the time, that is equally true. You do not understand who he is singing, or what prayers he is reciting, but that scarcely seems to matter. Religious experience, to a great extent, transcends language. You follow the people around you in making the familiar gestures already learned by heart, kneeling at certain moments, standing at others, crossing yourselves upon your chest. Everyone in the church, regardless of rank, is making the same movements and uttering the same prayers. That collective ritual feeling itself has tremendous force. The priest's voice echoes off the stone walls of the church, melodious and mysterious. Music, ritual, architecture, and light together create an atmosphere of awe. At a certain point in the Mass, you witness a very special rite. Two guests, usually close elder relatives of the couple, raise a large white cloth called the nuptial pall, and gently hold the heads of the kneeling bride and groom before the altar. The priest gives them a special blessing above the cloth. It symbolizes that their union is sheltered by the church, and that from now on they are one. This old custom, so visually striking, leaves you momentarily transfixed. The nuptial mass ends in solemnity, when the priest announces the blessing complete, and the couple turns to face the guests. The whole mood of the church changes at once, from grave to joy. Smiles spread across people's faces, and congratulations begin to pass from mouth to mouth. Then everyone files back out of the church into the brilliant sun. What follows is one of the happiest and noisiest parts of the wedding day, the procession escorting the newlyweds to the feast hall. This is a carefully orchestrated celebratory performance. The bride's family has already hired a band of minstrels. The moment the newlyweds step out of the church doors, the musicians strike up lively music. The sharp, high melody of the bagpipes, the crisp plucking of the lute, and the rhythmic beat of the hand drum ignite the atmosphere in an instant. The procession is led by the bride and groom, walking side by side at the front, their faces bright with happiness. Behind them come the immediate family members of both sides and the highest-ranking guests. Then you and the other ordinary guests. At the rear trails a large crowd of villagers who have come to watch the excitement, along with children running here and there. The whole procession is like a colorful, noisy river flowing slowly through the roads of the village. Guests cheer loudly and throw grain and flower petals at the couple as symbols of abundance. This is a public proclamation to the whole community. Look, this man and this woman are now husband and wife. Come and share our joy. This kind of open, energetic celebration was an indispensable part of a medieval wedding. It reinforced communal bonds and ensured that everyone jointly witnessed and acknowledged the new union. You are swept along amid the crowd, carried by this immense wave of joy. As you walk, you chat with the friends beside you, sharing impressions of what you saw in the church. Suddenly, you notice a small commotion at the front of the procession. A group of young men suddenly breaks away and races off toward the feast hall like arrows shot from a bow. This is a very interesting custom of the time, the race for the bride's garter. These young men run all the way from the church to the bride's house. The first one to arrive wins the right to receive one of the bride's garters or a ribbon from her as a prize. People believe that this intimate token of the bride brings good luck, especially that it will help a bachelor quickly find his own beloved. Watching them run with all their might, you feel that this slightly rough, chaotic tradition adds a touch of lively, untamed amusement to the formal wedding. You look up at the minstrels laboring away at their performance. They wear bright but somewhat worn clothes, and their faces carry practiced professional smiles. But what are they really? Respected artists, or people viewed as scarcely above vagabonds and tricksters? In truth, their status is highly ambiguous and contradictory. On the one hand, a highly skilled court musician could win aristocratic patronage and live decently. On the other hand, most ordinary wandering minstrels occupied a very low social position and were often associated with instability and immorality. Their place lay somewhere between artist and beggar, depending entirely on their memory, their luck, and the nature of those they served. You watch them and think, they have brought joy to this wedding, but in what corner of the feast will they themselves be seated? The procession continues on in a swell of music, and the outline of the feast hall grows ever clearer ahead. The destination is the great hall of the bride's family manor, where the wedding banquet will be held. The moment you step through the doors, a warm rush of air mixed with the smell of roast meat, firewood smoke, and the heat of the crowd washes over you. The hall is very spacious, with a high roof, enormous tapestries depicting hunting scenes, and battles hang on the wall, decorating them while also helping a little with insulation. The floor is strewn with fresh rushes, soft underfoot and faintly fragrant. But you have no time to admire the decor, because you are faced with an urgent challenge, finding your seat. At a medieval banquet, there is no such thing as sitting wherever you like. The arrangement of seats is a matter of extremely serious politics. It is like an invisible map, precisely marking the social rank of every person present. At the far end of the hall, on a wooden platform raised a few steps above the floor, stands the high table, the true center of power at the feast. Only the newlyweds, their immediate kin, and the most exalted guests, such as that lord in dark red velvet, are entitled to sit there. Below the high table are several long trestle tables made from boards set on support, and the key to determining where you sit is a large ornate salt cellar placed in the middle of one such table. Salt is a valuable commodity at this time, and so the salt cellar has become a boundary marker of social rank. To sit above the salt, that is, near the high table, means your status is relatively high. To be placed below the salt means you are of more ordinary standing. You see a master of ceremonies in the family livery, holding a staff that symbolizes authority, loudly directing guests to their places. He is like a traffic officer, guiding vehicles of different weights into different lanes. You crane your neck, looking for familiar faces in the crowd, while also secretly observing who has been placed where. That prickly bearded great uncle you met on the road has been seated not far from the salt, so apparently his standing in the family is higher than you had thought. You and your parents, meanwhile, are directed to seats in the middle section of one of the long tables, not low, an arrangement perfectly in keeping with your family's current social status. Just as everyone is settling in and waiting for the meal to begin, you witness a dramatic ritual. A high-ranking servant, or on exceptionally grand occasions, even a young nobleman steps up to the high table. He is the food taster or cupbearer. His task is this: before the lord and the distinguished guests eat, he must first taste the food and wine prepared for them. He cuts off a small piece of bread, dips it in the gravy, puts it into his mouth, chews carefully, swallows, and then waits a moment to make sure there is no sign of poisoning. Then he pours a little wine into his own cup and drinks it down. This highly ritualized act serves to prove to everyone that the Lord's food is safe and has not been poisoned by enemies. At a wedding on the level of a country gentleman, such a practice may be more a matter of display than genuine necessity, but it reflects very deeply the pervasive suspicion and special protection surrounding power in upper-class society at the time. As the lord at the high table lifts his cup, the banquet begins. A flurry of footsteps erupts, servants carrying huge trays enter the hall in formation like a disciplined army. The first course arrives. Food is not served in individual portions. Instead, it is placed on large shared dishes from which 2 or 4 guests seated together eat communally. You share one platter with a woman beside you, whom you do not know, and this immediately puts your table manners to the test. There is no plate in front of you, only a small square slab of coarse, thick bread. This is your trencher. A servant places a portion of roast meat and some vegetables from the communal platter onto your bread trencher, and you cut the food directly on top of it with your knife. The bread absorbs the meat juices and grease. When you have finished eating what is on top, you may choose to eat the bread too, now soaked with delicious juices, or if you want to appear more elegant, you may leave it. After the banquet, such trenchers are collected and distributed to the poor waiting at the door, or fed to dogs. The practice is practical, economical, and even charitable, a small medieval invention of remarkable efficiency. Your utensils consist of only a knife and a spoon. Yes, no fork, although forks already existed at the time. In England and many other places, they were still regarded as an affected, effeminate contrivance used by Italians. So the main tools with which you eat are your knife and your hand. You cut the meat into small pieces with your knife, then use your hand, usually the right hand, to bring it to your mouth. The spoon is for soup or stewed dishes. As you eat carefully, you try hard to recall the table manners your mother taught you. It is a very complicated set of rules, and an important measure of whether a person is considered well-bred. For example, you must not rest your elbows on the table. You must not blow food to cool it, but wait patiently for it to cool on its own. Before drinking from the communal cup, you must first wipe your mouth with your napkin, so as not to leave grease on the rim. That is considered extremely rude, and you must not toss gnawed bones onto the floor. You are to place them neatly at one side of the table. You do your best to observe all these rules, and the meal feels almost like sitting an examination. The dishes from the first course are cleared away during the interval before the second course. The entertainment formally begins. The minstrels, who had until now merely provided background music, raise the volume and play lively, more rhythmic tunes. An open space has been left in the middle of the hall. Into it tumbles a jester in a red and yellow motley outfit, wearing a cap with donkey ears. The moment he appears, the hall erupts in laughter. At times he tells punning jokes. At others he imitates the gait of a noble peasant, sending the room into roaring laughter. What is interesting is that the targets of his mimicry and mockery are often the highest-ranking people there, including the host of the feast and even the distinguished lord. This is a tolerated privilege. The jester is the only person who can publicly offend the powerful without fearing punishment. His performance acts like a social safety valve, dissolving some of the tension produced by hierarchy through laughter. No sooner has the jester finished than two acrobats replace him. One man lies on the ground, deftly spinning a large barrel with his feet, while the other tosses 5 or 6 apples into the air and still manages to keep interacting with the crowd. Their skill draws bursts of astonishment and applause. This is a medieval party, a comprehensive entertainment feast combining dining, music, comedy, and acrobatics. It keeps people from becoming bored during the long banquet and also gives the host a chance to display wealth and taste. After all, hiring professional entertainers costs money. Once these noisy performances are over, an elderly minstrel steps into the center of the hall. He carries no instrument. He merely clears his throat, and the room gradually falls silent. Then, in a rhythmic and dramatic voice, he begins to recite a long epic. This is a literary form known as a chanson de geste, telling of the heroic deeds of legendary figures such as Roland and King Arthur. At times his voice rises with passion, imitating the clash of battle. At others, it drops into grief, describing the sacrifice of heroes. You may have heard these stories many times before, but in the mouth of so gifted a teller, they still possess irresistible power. The whole hall listens, spellbound, as if personally witnessing those ancient legends. This kind of narrative performance is not merely entertainment. It is also a transmission of cultural values. It repeatedly reaffirms for the nobles and knights present the ideals they prize: courage, loyalty, and honor, the virtues of chivalry. You look toward the lord seated at the high table. He watches the jester's performance with evident amusement and laughs heartily, even when he himself is mocked. But is the jester really just a simple fool who earns his living through clowning? Or is he, in fact, a highly intelligent observer and critic of society? Using foolishness as a protective disguise, he is granted the privilege of telling truths, smuggling criticisms and advice to the center of power through jokes and feigned madness. Some scholars argue that the jester functioned as a kind of official opposition in the medieval world, and that his very existence displayed the lord's openness and confidence. Others, however, think that this role has been romanticized by later generations. Most of the time, they argue, he was simply a clown employed to amuse. You look at the jester capering at the lord's feet and try to glimpse some truth in the complexity of their interaction. A blast of trumpets sounds, and the second and third courses are brought in with great ceremony. If the first course emphasized quantity and satiety, what follows is an ultimate display of wealth, power, and global trade. At the center of that display are spices, the dishes the servants bring in, whether roast meats, pies, or stews, give off a rich, complex, even somewhat piercing fragrance. You cut off a piece of meat and place it in your mouth, and at once an unprecedented storm of flavors explodes across your palate. You taste the heat of black pepper, the sweetness of cinnamon, the warmth of cloves, the dreamlike depth of nutmeg, and the bite of ginger. The flavors pile upon one another, forceful and commanding, almost completely covering the taste of the meat itself. That is exactly the effect the host intends. In medieval Europe, spices were worth their weight in gold. They came from the distant east, from India and the spice islands of Indonesia. They traveled by the long and perilous Silk Road, or by sea route, passing through the hands of Arab merchants and the fleets of Venice and Genoa before finally reaching European markets. So the heavy use of spices in a dish was not, as a widespread modern misconception claims, a way of disguising the smell of spoiled meat. Quite the opposite, it was the loudest possible kind of display. The host is telling you through your own taste buds, look how rich I am. I can scatter the treasures of the far end of the world over my roast as though they were salt. Besides spices, color too is part of the display. You see one fish dish dyed a vivid yellow with expensive saffron. Another meat preparation is an enticing red from sandalwood coloring. These dishes are carefully arranged, bright and multicolored, looking almost like paint. Among these exotic dishes, you also taste something that feels very novel indeed. Sugar. In a small meat pie, you detect a distinct sweetness. At the time, sugar is not the everyday seasoning we know today. Like pepper and cloves, it is classified as an expensive imported spice. Sugar is so costly that it is seldom used by itself for dessert. More often, it is added to savory dishes involving meat and fish to create a sweet, salty, richly glazed flavor considered highly refined and fashionable. You savor that sweet meat pie carefully, the combination may feel strange, but it is undeniably distinctive and luxurious. Sometimes hosts even have sugar fashioned into elaborate sculptures as decorations for the banquet, further advertising their wealth. Just when you think the feast has reached the height of extravagance, the hall doors are pushed open once more. This time, the people entering are not servants carrying dishes, but part of a grand theatrical procession. The music rises higher, and guests set down the utensils in their hands and crane toward the doorway. The climax of the banquet has arrived. The course of marvel. These marvel dishes are less food than edible works of art. Their chief purpose is not to fill the stomach, but to create surprise and wonder, the ultimate display of the host's wealth and imagination. The piece presented today is a castle painstakingly made from dough and marzipan. It has soaring towers, stout walls, and a drawbridge that opens and closes. Along the battlements stand tiny sugar knights holding lances. The entire castle rests on a great wooden board and requires 4 servants to carry it steadily into the hall. When it is borne to the center of the room, a wave of astonishment breaks out from the crowd. People whisper to one another, point, and stare in disbelief. That is the power of the marvel dish. It breaks down the boundary between food and art, adding fantasy and drama to the banquet. You are still absorbed in the shock of this edible castle, when another, even more astonishing creation appears. The servants bring in a huge pie, baked to a golden brown. Its crust looks ordinary enough, but when the chief cook solemnly cuts open the top with a long knife, something astonishing happens. More than 20 live blackbirds burst out of the crust and fly upward, circling above the guests' heads and chattering noisily. The whole hall instantly collapses into a joyous chaos. You are dumbstruck by the sudden spectacle. This is the real-life counterpart of the famous English nursery rhyme about 24 blackbirds baked in a pie. Of course, the birds were not actually baked. They were inserted through a hatch in the bottom after the crust had been cooked. This culinary trick combining living creatures with food was meant to create a surreal and unforgettable entertainment effect. It showed off the host's ingenuity and humor, and it also reflected the medieval elite's fascination with wonders and illusion. You look at the chief cook, now receiving thunderous applause for his masterpiece as he bows proudly to the Lord. That soon-to-be carved castle, and the blackbirds still flying around the hall, make you feel deeply that this feast has gone beyond mere eating and has become a grand performance full of marvel and imagination. As the shock of the final marvel course slowly subsides, the banquet itself gradually draws toward its end. But end does not mean everyone is about to go home. It means the beginning of another major event, drinking and toasting. Servants start clearing away the remains of the meal, but their other task is heavier still, making sure every cup remains full. Now, the social meanings of different drinks emerge once again. The cups of the distinguished guests at the high table are filled with deep red wine imported from Gascony in France. For them, drinking wine is a symbol of status and taste. For ordinary guests like you, seated below the salt, the cups hold locally brewed ale or cider, paler in color. In an age when the safety of the water supply is highly doubtful, fermented ale is far safer than drinking raw water. It is the everyday beverage of everyone from king to peasant. You raise your wooden cup and take a deep drink. The ale is rich, with a faint sweetness. It may not be as elegant as wine, but it is certainly enough to quench thirst and lift spirits. Then the endless toasting begins. The host of the banquet, the bride's father, stands first, raising his cup and delivering a long blessing, wishing the couple a happy marriage and many children. Everyone drains their cups. Then the honored lord rises to congratulate the host on his generosity and hospitality. And everyone drinks again. Then comes the groom's father, the parish priest, some important kinsmen, one after another. Everyone wants to seize the chance to display eloquence and offer blessings to the newlywed. Under the influence of alcohol, the atmosphere becomes ever warmer and noisier. Cheeks flush red, voices grow louder, the careful etiquette is cast aside, replaced by a more relaxed and intimate camaraderie. You and the woman who had earlier been a stranger at your side are now clinking cups like old friends. In one pause between toasts, a servant brings you a small cup of warm liquid, fragrant and rich. This is hippocras, a spiced wine made by heating wine with large amounts of sugar, cinnamon, ginger, cardamom, and other spices, usually served at the end of a banquet as a digestive. You take a sip. The warmth, sweetness, and spice slide down your throat, instantly driving away the slight weariness brought on by drink. Being served hippocras is proof that this is a feast of very high standing, because both the sugar and the spices used to make it are extremely expensive. You look around the hall and see 100 different states of being. Some people are already dead drunk, sprawled on the tables and snoring. Others are still shouting drinking games across the room. The nobles at the high table, meanwhile, continue to preserve a certain outward composure, though their smiles are looser than before. When the final toast is spoken, the main part of the banquet is finally declared over. But the celebrations are far from finished. Servants move in briskly, taking apart the long trestle tables and benches and carrying them to the sides of the hall, quickly clearing a wide open space in the center. The minstrels, who had looked a little weary, revived themselves and began playing rhythmic dance music. Now the after-feast entertainments begin, dancing and games. This is not the kind of carefree swaying you may be imagining. Medieval dance, especially in courtly and aristocratic settings, is mostly communal dance, with fixed steps and formation. One of the most popular forms is the carol. The dancers join hands, forming a long line or a circle, and under the lead of the chief dancer, move together to the beat of the music forward. Back, turning. The lady of high rank is invited to lead, and with grace she steps to the middle and calls others to join. Soon a long line has formed. You too join in happily. Your left hand clasps that of a young knight, while your right is held by a plump gentlewoman. The music begins, and you do your best to keep up with the leader's step. You miss the beat now and then, but no one minds in this joyful communal activity. Personal awkwardness is absorbed into the harmony of the group. Dance brings people physically closer and gives you a chance for brief, intimate contact with people who sat far from you at table. On the other side of the hall, those who do not like dancing or are older gather around smaller tables and take up various games. You see two or three knights staring intently at a chessboard, engaged in a fierce match. A few merchants and country gentry are playing a game called tables, the forerunner of backgammon. What draws your attention most, however, is a group of young people playing a newer and more curious game, cards. Playing cards seem to have entered Europe from the East by way of the Arab world sometime in the late 14th century, and at the time they are still a fashionable novelty. You go over for a closer look and realize that you cannot understand the rules at all. But judging from the small piles of coins stacked before them, this is plainly a game involving gambling. When cards first arrived in Europe, they immediately attracted fierce criticism from the church and from moralists because of their associations with gambling and idleness, and in some regions they were even formally banned. And yet those bans seem not to have stopped their rapid spread among the upper classes. So how did people at the time view this controversial new form of entertainment? To what extent did it trigger what we might call a moral panic? Looking at the excited faces of those young players, you feel that whatever the moralists may say, the human appetite for novelty and stimulation seems to be an eternal constant. In a farther corner, the atmosphere is even wilder. A group of less decorous young men and women are playing a game of blind man's buff. It is essentially the medieval version of blind man's bluff. One young man has a headscarf tied over his eyes. After being spun around several times, he begins trying to catch the others within a small marked-off area, while they dodge him and lightly whip him with strips of cloth. The game is full of bodily contact and cheerful shriek. It is far rougher than chess or cards, but it also carries a more primal joy, a more direct release of human nature. Watching them, you feel that the wedding celebration is gradually moving away from solemn order toward a freer, more carnivalesque climax. The night has grown deep, the candles in the hall have burned more than halfway down, and the air is filled with the scent of fatigue and contentment. But before this long day can truly end, there is one final ritual to complete, also the most important, and to modern sensibilities perhaps the most awkward of all: the public bedding ceremony. You may find it hard to believe, but at the time, especially among the nobility and prosperous classes, this was an indispensable part of a wedding. It served as the final confirmation of the marriage. The marriage begins with public vows at the church door. It must also end with the public escorting of the couple to the marriage bed. The purpose of this rite is to show all the important witnesses that the marriage is now ready to be consummated, thereby dispelling any doubts that might affect its legitimacy. Led by several highly respected elders, a crowd of guests tipsy, but still full of enthusiasm, surround the bride and groom and escort them in grand procession toward their bedchamber. You are part of the group too. The whole event is full of boisterous joking and noisy good humor. Some young male guests take advantage of the chaos to try to snatch the bride's garter from her leg, or her little trinkets from her purse. These are considered lucky tokens, said to help whoever wins them into marriage soon as well. The bridal chamber has already been prepared. A huge four-poster bed dominates the center of the room, spread with clean white linen sheets. The parish priest is already waiting there. He sprinkles holy water on the bed while reciting prayers of blessing, asking God to grant the couple offspring and protect their union from evil spirits. Then comes the more intimate part. The bride's attendants, usually her closest sisters or friends, step forward to help her out of her elaborate wedding clothes and into a light nightgown. On the other side of the room, the groom too is helped by his male relatives to remove his formal garb. The whole process takes place in full view. People try to keep a certain distance and show proper respect, but the feeling of being watched must still be very strange. When the bride and groom are both ready and seated together on the bed, one elder brings them a final shared drink, usually a warm, milk-based beverage, with spices and eggs called posset, said to have nourishing and aphrodisiac properties. After they drink it, the ceremony reaches its climax. Before everyone's eyes, they lie down side by side, and then the heavy curtains around the bed are slowly drawn, separating them from the outside world. The moment the curtains are closed, the guests exchange knowing smiles, turn, and quietly leave the room, giving the couple their space. You follow the crowd out, your mind full of complicated feelings. But what did the bride and groom themselves actually feel, standing at the center of this ritual? To us modern people, it seems like an unbearable nightmare of violated privacy. But to people at the time, was it truly a dreadful and humiliating ordeal, or a generally accepted tradition, perhaps even one full of delight? Might they have felt that, under the shared blessing of friends and kin, they were completing the most important step of their lives? We can never truly know their emotion. You look at the tightly closed chamber door and the darkness behind it beyond those drawn curtains, and feel that between yourself and that age lies a vast, invisible, emotional gulf. After the bedding ceremony, this magnificent wedding, lasting a full day, finally draws to a close. The guests, reeking of drink and exhausted, begin to take their leave in small groups. You too find the horse you rode in on and prepare to set out home with your family. The night air is cold and still, sharply contrasting with the clamor of the feast hall during the day. The road you traveled earlier now has a completely different face beneath the night sky. Without sunlight, everything around you is swallowed in deep darkness. Your party lights several torches, whose jumping flames cast wavering shadows on the ground and illuminate only a small patch of road ahead. Traveling at night is itself somewhat risky. Darkness not only makes it easy to lose one's way, it also magnifies fear of unknown dangers, whether imagined bandits or the ghosts of folk legend. So traveling together in a group with torches is both a practical necessity and a kind of psychological comfort. You sit on horseback, your body gently swaying with the rhythm of the animal. It is very quiet around you. You hear only the sound of hooves pressing into the soil, and now and then the chirp of insects. The excitement noise of the day have faded, replaced by a pleasant weariness and a quiet aftertaste of memory. Scenes from the day flicker through your mind like a film. The solemn vows at the church door, the clearly stratified seating in the feast hall, the marble dish with blackbirds flying out of the pie, and the final bedding ritual, a little awkward and yet deeply significant. All of these sensory, social, and emotional fragments slowly settle and ferment during the peaceful journey home, ultimately combining into one complete and profound memory. After some time, who knows how long, you finally return to your lodging. You take off the clothes you have worn all day, dusty and stained with drink, and change into your night things. Before lying down, you make one last small gesture tinged with superstition. You pick up a little piece of iron from beside the hearth and tuck it beneath your pillow. This is a widely spread folk custom. People believe that iron can ward off evil and protect the sleeper from malignant spirits. This blending of official religious belief with ancient folk custom is very common at the time. It forms part of the complex spiritual landscape of ordinary medieval people. You lie down on the bed, hold the familiar rough wool blanket over yourself, and prepare to sleep.